Hey planet, Jennifer Batten here, welcoming you to another episode of So This One Time, okay, where I'm going to talk about the first tour I ever did with an Elvis impersonator.
They call it
Story
Monday.
I was so excited to go on tour for the first time. The Elvis impersonator that I worked with was named Bobby King, and he had a brother that was a missionary on the island of American Samoa, so that was the connection to get us down and do some shows. When we arrived on the island, we were greeted with leis, and it smelled incredible. Every time I go to Hawaii, that's the first thing I get is a lei, and I put it on my pillow at night to smell it throughout the night. This is a photo pre-show of the band hanging out. There were several horn players there, and I can never forget the first time they came to my house to rehearse. That's when I found out that horns end up with a whole lot of spit in them, and you have to provide somewhere for that spit to go. So I broke out some newspapers for the guys. Bobby and a brother that lived in America and his wife and his kids all came down for the fun. It was really like a paid vacation. A couple times a week, tourists would show up in giant cruise ships, hang out for the day, and then take off again. This was back in the day of instamatic cameras, long before the cell phone cameras of today. Most of the pictures in my camera would end up like this, with a flash blowing it out completely. The whole island was 25 miles long. Compared to the neighborhood I grew up in, it was very exotic. I went for a lot of long walks just to soak in the culture and the surroundings. Now here's a fresh ship that I discovered. I have a feeling it had been there for quite some time. One day I got to the end of the island on my walk, and I discovered a guy playing PacMan at a local convenience store with a lava skirt and some flip-flops. We were surrounded by a completely different culture. Our hotel was right on the water, and we went swimming every day. Most of the locals didn't even wear shoes. They only wore a wrap around their waist. That's all that was needed. The weather was awesome, except for 30 minutes every day when it would rain. The band would wake up late, and then we would get to breakfast about 15 minutes before it closed and order mahi. It was living the life. A lot of the houses didn't even have walls. They didn't need them. Everybody was family on the island. Everybody knew each other. It was a big show with 15 people on the stage. Here we have the sax player and one of the background singers exploring. And this cable car provided a really great way to see everything from above. I have a feeling this was one of the most exciting times on the island because most tours don't go to Samoa. So of course we were in the papers every day. This is one of the locals dancing with the keyboard player. We're dancing to the hotel band, and it blew my mind that so many miles away from home, long before the internet, the guitar player sounded like George Benson. He was amazing. This is a truck that was painted up for our event that ran around the island with people advertising the Elvis tribute show. You would hear this truck coming for miles every day with Elvis's music blasting out of it. And this is Bobby sporting a lei before the show, getting his show head together. I think a lot of Elvis impersonators start out as hairdressers, and one day they look in the mirror and start teasing and go, I could be Elvis. He put on a great show, very energetic. One thing I remember though is there was a problem getting our equipment. For some reason, it got stuck in Hawaii, and it never did arrive in Samoa. So we ended up having to use what was there. I remember looking back at my guitar cabinet that they provided for me, and there was no cover on it, and you could see the speaker cone was ripped, which is actually how the first guitar players that got distortion got it. They would take a razor blade to the paper in the speaker cone, slice it, and let it flap. After we played in Samoa, we also had some gigs in Colorado. One of the standout memories from that, we had some really old school dry ice for fog and a fan that was supposed to blow it on stage. And the very end of the show, he got down and took his cape and put it over him, and he was supposed to get covered in fog, and that was the end of the show. Curtains closed. Well, one night, he just wasn't ever covered with fog. He just kept holding the final chord for a ridiculously long time. I think eventually he realized he wasn't ever going to get covered in fog, and just stood up and walked away. That's live. Another memory from the Colorado shows is we stopped at a truck stop to get some gas at one point, and when we took off, we forgot his daughter. We went for at least 15 minutes until somebody realized she wasn't there and had to turn back. There were a few mind-blowing things, like one time after breakfast, the waitress took a couple chicken carcasses and threw them to the eel pond that was right by us. It reminded me of piranha from the Tarzan movies that would just devour things immediately. And then there was the time I went swimming on my own, and I don't have the best vision, so of course underwater I didn't have glasses on. And I swam and I saw something very curious, and I swam closer and closer. Eventually I was about a foot away from an electric eel. That scared the piss out of me, so I didn't go back in the water for the rest of the trip. And then there were the fruit bats. This was at a second hotel we went to that was in western Samoa. There were two sides of the hotel that faced each other, and in the lawn in the middle, there was a ginormous cage full of bats. Just kind of an odd thing to see at a hotel. I can still kind of remember the smell. The people were amazingly friendly, and we got to know them even better once we got kicked out of the hotel because we found out the promoter ran off with the pre-ticket sales and nobody was going to pay for the hotel. So we ended up sleeping on the floor of a local chief. I'll never forget the drummer Roy coming up to me and telling me he was in a quandary because Bobby was singing My Way in 5/4. So Roy wasn't sure if he should try to guide him back into 4/4 or just go with it. When I first started rehearsing with him, I wasn't all that familiar with Elvis's music other than things that were on the radio. I had never seen him live before, so I didn't realize that he was really into doing karate moves and other such antics. So when Bobby started doing those at rehearsal, I thought he was just goofing around. So I joined him doing some of the same moves, but I didn't get a laugh. I didn't realize that that was really what was going to happen on the show. I was probably discussing with one of the locals how we ended up wearing the same color that day. One of the things that was truly wild is there was a bunch of wild pigs running around all the time, and chickens and other animals. I thought it was delightful. I think this one was Bobby about to punk the trumpet player awake. This was the floor that we were sleeping on the last few days we were there. This was Maka, the chief whose floor we were sleeping on, and also the man who was looking after us during the whole tour. He used to run Polynesian shows in Las Vegas, but his wife thought he was too crazy and needed to raise the kids back in Samoa. So he started up a tour company, and he was the guy that would drive us around. After the last show was one of the funnest memories of being down there. There was a whole lot of alcohol involved, and Maka was telling us the wildest stories throughout his life. His first time to America, he had never seen hot dogs before, and he went to a vendor and looked up close and saw what he was selling and ran away, because it looked like something that humans just shouldn't be eating. I wrote to him a few times after the tour was over. I really wanted to get back. I never have gone back to Samoa, but in lieu of not being able to, I read Margaret Mead's book, The Anthropologist, called Coming of Age in Samoa. From then on, I was hooked on touring and have been to a whole lot of magical places. The culture down there was fascinating, and at that time, anyway, it's been many decades, but at that time, there were a whole lot of chiefs on the island. If anybody in their area needed help, it was up to the chief to help them out. One of the goofiest memories I recall on that tour is there was only one road on the island, 25 miles long, and Maka had been drinking at our show or the after party. He was driving the van, had no business doing it, but of all the places to drunk drive, being on a tiny island was probably the best. There was only one road on the island, and he went the wrong way. After he turned around, he finally got back to his property where we were staying, and there was a big ditch with a wooden bridge that would go over it, and nobody trusted him to make it, so we all bailed out of the van. And I recall his wife was beating him the whole time. He's a big Samoan man, and she had a much smaller frame and was just pounding him in the arm, and he just giggled. I do not approve of drunk driving, by the way, and the only other tour I did with the Elvis impersonator, there was a limo driver that drove us to the show, drank the whole time we were at the show, and was about to drive us back when I put my foot down. We ended up driving back in the van with all of the gear. I think I was on top of the drums. One of the statements Maka told me that I'll remember forever. He said that all of the natives were generally very, very happy until they got TV. And once they got TV, they saw how other people in the world lived. And then it became an alcohol paradise where they have a huge alcohol problem. I think this was the first time I ever saw foreign currency. And I keep a lot of scrapbooks, so I've got a lot of currency in them by now. After we played shows in American Samoa, we went to Western Samoa. Notice on this man, just above his skirt, there is a tattoo that comes above his hip. The locals, at least at that time, had a native tradition of doing tattoos the native way, where there's no electricity, there's no electric gun, it's just ta-tow, ta-tow. And I'm sure it hurts like hell. It's one of the things they would do as a coming-of-age ritual. It would start above the hips and go halfway down the upper leg with a traditional pattern. Here's a great shot of the tropical paradise we were hanging out in. So folks, that's what started it all for me. I had a blast.